Welcome to Shareholders of a Better World, brought to you by TBLI Group. At TBLI Group, we have an established reputation as an organization dedicated to building the ecosystem of global sustainability and impact investing. We're doing this through educating, advising, and facilitating transactions in global sustainability and impact business, as well as capital solutions for private companies, family offices, and fund groups. For nearly 25 years, TBLI Group has created a vertically integrated ecosystem of education to action through TBLI conferences and TBLI consulting. More about our company can be found at tbligroup.com. This webinar is brought to you by TBLI Foundation, which hosts educational learning experiences dedicated to a better planet. Through the foundation, we build sustainable communities by sharing the people and the experiences making a difference to so many of our lives around the world. Our weekly podcasts bring impact thought leaders that are doing and not only chatting. Now let me introduce my guest today.
Good afternoon from our studio in Amsterdam. I'm incredibly honored that Catherine Flowers has joined us today. Before I introduce her, just some housekeeping rules. When you join, just type in briefly in the comments who you are and introduce yourself. If you need to send a private chat to anyone, just move your mouse over the person's name and a window will pop up and you'll be able to send that person a private chat. All of the people that registered will be on your phone or in your desktop. As attendees, you can always reach out to them. So we are really, really lucky that Catherine found an hour to give to us because she's one of the most busiest people I know. Catherine Coleman Flowers is a MacArthur Fellow winner or a Genius Award. She's often called the Erin Brockovich of municipal waste, trying to bring fresh water and municipal waste solutions to rural America. She's also recently was asked to join the Biden team for environmental justice, and her list of accolades just go on and on and on. So I'm not going to really go through all of that. I'm going to let Catherine basically introduce herself, tell us what she's doing, and then we'll start into the Q&A a bit later. So Catherine, thank you so much for coming. And for those of you who live on a different planet and don't know who you are, just tell us about your background and your journey that brought you where you are now.
Yes, good morning. Thank you. Thank you for having me as a guest this morning. Well, I am in Montgomery, Alabama. For those that don't know, Montgomery is a very historic area. It is the birthplace of the modern day civil rights movement because Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Preached here and actually started a movement that was the Montgomery bus boycott. This is where Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on the bus, and it led to a lot of changes that took place in the South that we're still fighting to maintain today. Among them is wastewater treatment, equitable wastewater and sanitation treatment throughout the South, but we've since discovered is throughout the United States of America. So my entree into all of this is that I moved back to Alabama after teaching for many years and living in other places. I moved back in 2000 and found out that people were being arrested because they could not afford on-site sanitation and thought that it was simply because of poverty. And that was the reason why the residents themselves could not afford it. However, I've since learned that it's more complicated than that. Poverty, of course, is a factor, and sometimes it's even Jim Crow laws that existed years ago that prevented people from getting access to sanitary sewer, and it's still serving the same purpose. But we also found out that climate change factors into it, and the natural ecosystem, which is in Lowndes County, Alabama, where I do a lot of my work, and that's located between Selma and Montgomery, and the site of the historic Selma to Montgomery Voting Rights March. The water tables are very high. Recently, we tried to do put in place on-site septic for a family, and when they dug down 25 inches, they struck water. So they couldn't use a conventional septic system and had to be engineered, and the price was 28,000 American dollars, which is a lot of money for a middle-class family, even more so for a poor family. And in Lowndes County, we have a lot of poor families. In recent times, because of the pandemic, in the state of Alabama, there are 67 counties that the state is divided into. Lowndes County has the highest per capita death and infection rate from COVID than any other county in the state, and largely, I believe, because of the exposure to raw sewage. What is raw sewage? It means that the toilets work, that we don't need a new toilet. The problem is what happens once it leaves the toilet. When it leaves the toilet, it ends up, in the case of Lowndes County, people that don't have wastewater treatment, they flush it, and it ends up outside their home, generally on top of the ground. The other problems that we found was that not only do people straight pipe, that's what it's called, when the straight pipe out of the toilet, out of the home onto the ground, we have people that have failing septic systems, and they're failing largely because of the high water tables, or they're failing because in the case of recently, we had a major freeze here that impacted, I'm sure you've heard about what happened in Texas, where the entire grid just did not work. They tried to blame it on renewable energy, but it's because they had a grid that was independent and no other grids outside of the state of Texas could put electricity there to keep their system running, and it failed. So whoever came up with that bright idea decided to blame it on renewable energy because renewable energy could have potentially saved them from what happened. Not only did their electric grid fail, their water systems failed as well, and their wastewater systems failed. In other words, they couldn't even flush their toilets. They had no water to flush their toilets with. But in addition to that, in the state of Mississippi, Jackson is their capital. And the freeze also impacted Jackson to the point that people in those areas lost power too. And they also lost water, and they lost water for a longer period of time. The parts of Texas and the parts of Jackson that suffered the most were those communities that were primarily communities of color. They got the worst infrastructure, or they got the cheapest infrastructure, and the infrastructure failed. How does that impact them, or how does that impact the economy? Well, recently I was speaking with representatives from the city of Montgomery because we found out that in Montgomery, Alabama, that there are communities that are not connected to sewer. They're paying a wastewater fee and they're paying a water fee, but they're not connected to sewer. As a result, those communities are suffering. They have on-site septic systems that are failing. And when they fail, the sewage either comes back into their homes or go back or ends up out on the ground. When we met with the Water and Sewer Board, their position was, well, when they built those communities, the developers should have put the systems in place, and we take them over. We don't do that. But that's not true, because I used to do economic development for Lowndes County, and I was involved doing economic development at the time that Hyundai announced that it was building its first American plant in Montgomery, Alabama. And I know that it was a pasture, and the Water and Sewer Board extended sewer there. I know that they were also trying to extend sewer to where the Tier 1 suppliers were located in Lowndes County. The question is, why are they refusing to extend their sewer to the Black communities that do not have it and are within 500 feet of a sewer main here in Montgomery? That plays out in the national politics in this country too. Who has access to sanitation equity? And that's why it's an environmental justice issue. But we're finding that this problem is not just in the South. We're finding that this problem is throughout the United States. I'm actually engaged in a project with the Guardian newspaper where we're looking at wastewater for a year throughout the entire United States. And we're asking people to self-report problems because the government has no clear question of how many people do not have sanitary sewer in the U.S. which is a shame since we're one of the wealthiest countries. And sometimes we'll say we're the wealthiest country in the world. But these are the problems that you would not expect to find in a country that has so much. But a lot of the communities that are suffering are the poor communities. They're communities throughout the U.S. And recently, we were our first story that we did with the Guardian was on Centerville in Illinois, which is not necessarily deemed a rural community, but it's a suburban community. And when I went to Centerville, I saw more raw sewage on the ground there than I saw in Lowndes County. We're also getting reports from places like New York, one of the wealthiest counties in New York. There's a part of that county that's having wastewater problems. I recently did an interview with former President Bill Clinton, who talked about the fact that he's on a septic system, he and Hillary. But he also talked about how he attributes his second success when he was reelected governor, because, you know, he ran for governor of Arkansas and won, and then he ran again and lost. And he said that he had to go to the Black community, and he met at a location in the Delta region of Arkansas, and he said he was about to not get the nomination when a person raised their hand and talked about how he was supporting him because his children were playing in raw sewage in the yard before Bill Clinton was elected governor. And because of this man speaking out, he said that he got the nomination and he was elected governor again, and we know the rest of that story. But this is an issue that has attracted the attention of lots of people. And more recently, the Biden administration just released a plan called the American Jobs Plan, where they're also committing at least $111 billion for wastewater, water and sanitation systems, and that includes rural communities. And I'm really proud of that because a lot of the people that are serving with the administration also served with me on the Biden-Sanders Unity Task Force that was put together during the campaign, where we crafted not only policy on water and wastewater infrastructure and environmental justice, but we certainly crafted policy on climate change as well, because that is a factor. How do we deal with this? And why am I talking to you this morning? Well, this is a problem globally. It's not just an American problem. There are many places around the world. I've heard from people on most of the continents that are having wastewater issues as well. And we're going to see this becoming more and more prevalent when the technologies that we're currently using, the infrastructure that's in place is failing because of rising sea levels or extreme weather conditions that are happening more often. Wastewater is just part of them, but it's so fundamental to public health. So what we're proposing to do, my organization, the Center for Rural Enterprise and Environmental Justice, is a nonprofit that was created because of my experience in working and advocating for people primarily in rural communities that are suffering from wastewater problems. But we're finding, again, as I said, that these problems are existing in rural and urban areas. So we've decided that the next step, especially after receiving the MacArthur Award, the next step is for us to work on technologies. We want to flip and change the engineering paradigm. You know, I was told a story about a farm in Lowndes County where the farmer has sent all of his children to school to get degrees in agricultural science, but they can't run the farm. It's the workers that are running the farm. Anytime anything breaks, they have to ask the workers. They have machinery on this farm. The best machinery they say they have are the older tractors, but they can't find parts for the tractors. And one of the tractors stopped working. And when the tractor stopped working, actually one of the workers fabricated parts to keep the tractor working. And now he's fabricating parts for other farmers that have old farm equipment and can't find the parts to keep them working. That's the type of ingenuity that I want to tap into and place them with engineers and scientists to develop wastewater treatment systems that work. Because I think the best way to find, to develop these type of technologies are to bring in the room, the same room, and this is using the principles of environmental justice, to bring into the same room the people that have dealt with the failures and had to find ways in which to keep it from coming into their home, and have them sitting down with the people that can help design the solutions. And along with that, we want to incorporate space age technology. That's why I'm moving to Huntsville, Alabama. Huntsville, Alabama is now the location of the Space Command in the United States. It's also where NASA is located. And we know that they treat wastewater on the space shuttle, the drinking water quality. And we'd like to partner with them to find out how they use that technology and how we can bring that technology down to earth and come up with the kind of wastewater treatment that hopefully is equivalent to, I'm in a part of the country where it gets very hot. So you can't live here without an air conditioning system to keep it cool in your home. So when I built my home, I got a 10-year warranty on my HVAC system. And it has worked very well. It's really extended beyond that. And what we found out is that a lot of the industries here are pushing against warranties on their systems. So when they put these on-site wastewater systems in people's homes, when they put them in the ground, they walk away from them, and there's no liability. So when there's no incentive to improve the design or to change it when it doesn't work. And I one of the things that we're pushing for as well is the change in the technology, and that they have to have warranty so they can be liable for the failures because of the health consequences. But what we're hoping to do is create something akin to maybe an HVAC system that each home can have. They can treat wastewater. When it comes out, it will be clean, and that will flip the entire paradigm as it relates to wastewater. Because now what happens, even the big treatment plants, when we get a lot of rain and they fail, the raw sewage is going direct into our water sources. That's happening around the world. So our goal is to create something, to take what we've learned and create something that will work. We're not going to wait for someone else to come up with the solution, because I've been doing this for 20 years. It hasn't happened yet. So now, in order for us to come up with solutions, we want to inspire a technology challenge to create wastewater treatment solutions that can work, and hopefully work in different places around the world, flipping this paradigm that will lead to everyone having clean water and having potentially reusing and reclaiming what could come from a toilet that can be used for good purposes, and hopefully taking the shame away from waste. Because in this country, we haven't talked about this for so many years, because this is one thing that people don't want to discuss. But this is something that no matter where we are in the world, we're united by the fact that we all create waste, and we have to find a way in which to treat it that's also beneficial to the to our ecosystem, but also could provide economic opportunity. And if we have adequate wastewater treatment everywhere in the world where people want it, just imagine. I know in Lowndes County, where I did economic development, I couldn't attract businesses to an area that didn't have wastewater treatment. But that keeps people's property values low. It determines what type of economic development can happen in that area. And we need to change that. And that's why we have a lot of these environmental justice communities. So I'm hoping that my role on the White House Environmental Justice Advocacy Council will allow me an opportunity to be able to share insight from these perspectives that are generally not heard, and that we will find some long-term solutions that will not only help here in the U.S., but can be useful around the world. And we're looking for partners in that process.
The issue of municipal waste is a local issue, correct? I mean, it's not a federal government that funds the infrastructure to fix municipal waste, correct?
Well, that's not true in the U.S. a lot of the monies that are, especially in poor communities, but even in the wealthier communities, through the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, there's funding um, for wastewater treatment. There's also funding through the United States Department of Agriculture. So the question is, what happens once it gets to the states? You know, the federal government provides funding. Once it gets to the states, a lot of times it doesn't end up in the poorer communities because they don't have the bandwidth or the influence to get it to get the funds. So there are federal funds available. What the Biden administration is doing is proposing additional federal funds. Actually, the Biden administration has an infrastructure plan, and of course, wastewater and sanitation is part of that infrastructure. And they're proposing money that will ultimately go to the states. And our one of the things that I'm pushing for is what happens once it gets to the states. That's when we have the problems. These are some of the same states that are trying to keep people from getting water, standing in line to go vote when they have to stand in these lines because they have closed a lot of the polling places and to make the process more complicated. So if you can't even give someone water who's standing in line, you know they don't care about people using the bathroom and making sure that only certain communities get access to the funds. So yes, it's the federal government is also involved, but it does get local once it gets to the state.
When you look at all of the issues that the U.S. has to address and has neglected or avoided or intentionally, I mean, someone said to me that the U.S. congressional system works perfectly. It's just fixed. The fix is in. So how do you get, I mean, it's not a very sexy subject, municipal waste. You know, I can imagine it's not the most important, you know, the most exciting or thrilling scene. There's no kind of big ribbon cutting ceremony over there. We didn't go to the moon. So how do you get people actually even care about this? If you see that that the local community, the rural community, doesn't even want to deal with municipal waste when it's a public health hazard, how are you going to get them interested? And also, they don't really want these people voting. So why do you think that? How do you get them interested in this? Seems like mission impossible.
Well, I've been working on it for 20 years, and there's been a lot of interest in it lately. I think one of the things that was very helpful is I wrote the book Waste, One Woman's Fight Against America's Dirty Secret, that really tells the story of how I got engaged going from teaching to economic development to becoming a wastewater warrior. so, so basically, just telling the stories. I've allowed people to tell their own stories, and whenever people would come to Lowndes County, I would take them. You know, I've taken people there like Jane Fonda, activists and actors. People like Senator Bernie Sanders when he was running for president. Senator Sanders actually came and visited himself. Kat Taylor, who is the wife of Tom Steyer, who was also running for president, came to visit. Cory Booker, who ran for president, came to visit. So we were able to raise the visibility of this problem. And now with climate change, you know, or some would say Mother Nature being in the background, wreaking havoc on the infrastructure, there are a lot of people that are starting to suffer the problem that hadn't suffered it before. And we're also hearing from people who are more affluent, who've been silent about this. They're saying, I'm suffering I have the same problem. And they're pushing for a solution because a lot of people didn't think that it was systemic. They thought that it was a problem with the plumbing.
Mm.
But it's more than that. It's a problem that is at the intersection of environmental justice and climate change because there's been so much neglect, and it's been greater neglect in poorer communities than have been in other communities. But some affluent communities are starting to suffer the same issues. I've heard from people in the Hamptons, for an example, that are starting to have problems.
And do you think that it's just basically a political decision of the community says, well, these people don't vote, we don't really care, So why should we invest in the infrastructure? Let's just have a good high school football team and, build a stadium. I always tell friends of mine, if you really want to understand rural America, watch a TV show, Friday Night Lights, because it'll give you a very good insight into how important the high school football is. There's lots of money for that, but little money for things like municipal waste. Do you think it's basically an ignorance issue, or is it a willful feeling like, well, the hell with them? We don't really want to, fix. We have plumbing, so we don't care.
I think it's not quite that simple. I think there are some areas of the country where there's been willful neglect, yes. Uh, and the other areas, if you don't have a tax base, you can't pay for it. So you end up getting a cheaper infrastructure, and the cheaper infrastructure it just cannot stand up to the conditions that we have and that are recurring. And then you have communities that have been redlined. Redline meaning that if you are African American, your property values are different. They won't give you loans or mortgages to move into areas that may be more affluent or maybe whiter. So those red line areas, like when I mentioned Montgomery earlier, those were probably the areas where Black people settled around Montgomery first. And that's why they never got sewage in those areas. Those are areas over across the tracks. If you look at some of the other older American movies, people that lived across the tracks were the poor people in the community, whether they were Black or white. And you could tell when you cross those railroad tracks the difference in the communities and what kind of investment was there and who had money and who didn't. But I think that when it comes to something as basic as wastewater, what COVID has taught us, wastewater carries public health implications, and the next virus, the next disease doesn't have to start somewhere in another part of the world. It can start in any one of these areas that's been neglected. Because one of the things that we also found that elevated this issue and to an international issue is when we found hookworm in Lowndes County, Alabama. And hookworm is associated with poverty in third world nations, but this was the richest nation in the world. Supposed to be so great, but yet we had these conditions that existed that showed that we had neglected large groups of our population. Those populations have suffered from COVID deaths too as a result of the healthcare disparities that it creates. So I think that's one part of the problem. Then the other part of the problem is it takes a lot of money to invest in infrastructure, and a lot of the leaders in these communities, because they don't have it, they can't get it. And that's why what Biden is proposing is very important, because a lot of these communities that have been left behind, the only way they're going to get it is going to have to come from the federal government. But at the same time, we want to make sure that people are not lining up at the public trough, if you will. People that are creating these systems that are not working, putting them in place, and we're right back at the same place when Biden is no longer in office. Mm-hmm. And that's why the work that we're doing with the Center for Rural Enterprise and Environmental Justice is so important. We have to have this technology challenge. I've been talking with some people in Congress that are trying to do some work on the Senate side. And what they're proposing is funding for rural communities that will go to rural communities to deal with wastewater treatment. But I've also proposed that they put in that funding money for innovation and technology so we can inspire our universities and public and private partners to come up with ways to create ways to treat wastewater. It would ideally, if we could get people not just what we're doing, but if we can get people around the country and around the world to focus on this problem. Just imagine what we can come up with. Like we came up with these COVID vaccines that we didn't have a year ago. We had COVID a year ago, but we came up with the vaccines. If we make it a priority, I think we can find solutions.
Well, I agree. I agree with you, because I always heard from governments, we have no money. We have no money. We're broke. And all of a sudden, during COVID, everybody had lots of money to throw at the problem. Everyone who said they were broke, all of a sudden could find the money to pre-order vaccines or to support small enterprises or to send checks to people who are out of work. So it's
and to send lots of money to businesses supposedly that were larger businesses that were supposed to keep their employees employed, but they actually use that money to profit instead of keeping the economy going for a lot of people, because so many people are out of work now. There are lots of people that are out of work. I mean, it has gotten so bad. In fact, I know in one case where 3 members of the family died from COVID, and the last member, they had to do a GoFundMe account to pay for the funeral.
oh.
So now part of the proposal that Biden put out there, that the last plan involves even helping people to pay for funerals. Because, because we had a president that ignored COVID and said it was a hoax, although he took the vaccine himself before he left office, he and his wife. They were, they were not listening to the science. And that's one of the reasons why we've had some of the highest death rates in the world, because they were told it was like a flu. You didn't need to wear a mask. They were not socially distancing. And there have been lots of deaths that we should not have had. Here in Montgomery, for example, they had to close schools because in 1 week, 8 teachers died. So we have to we have to really be more focused on what we do, because when we make decisions, the impacts now could not only just impact Lowndes County, Alabama, but as we see in COVID, it could impact the entire world.
This is not a private sector solution, correct? This is a public sector. The government has to address this, correct?
I think it's a public and private sector solution, because the private sector gets involved because the government will give the money, but the private sector will create the technology that will be used to treat wastewater. And the private sector doesn't want regulation. But we have to have regulation so that we won't continue to have these failures that I'm documenting. That's the reason why you know about what I do, because I've been documenting this for years, and people would not acknowledge it now, but there are enough people acknowledging that this is a problem. But the private sector needs to be engaged, and there needs to be, we have to have the kind of competition that's going to encourage people that are engaged in the private sector solutions, come up with solutions that work, and not just solutions that will allow them to line up when the government makes the money available, sell them to the poor towns, and then 5 years later, the next Catherine Flowers is talking about the same thing.
Let's see. All right, but you're saying that you're engaging with space age technology to address municipal waste. Okay, so there are technical solutions. I'm sure a lot of innovation also in India and Philippines and in other places. But if the public sector is not really interested in allocating the resources, you could have the technological solution, but you're not getting, no one wants to put up the money. Because you don't seem to be like a kind of person, well, I'm happy if we get halfway there. You seem like an all-in person, like we're doing this or we're not doing this. So how, what is the trick? What is the trigger to get the public sector? Okay, now you're in a position of influence and power. You have access to Joe and the guys and the women in Washington. Let's move on this. How are you getting them on board for this?
They're definitely lining up. That's why I'm meeting with people here in Montgomery. I live in Montgomery, and I didn't know that there were wastewater problems here. And they actually, the city council person came to me and asked for help. So yes, people are taking an interest. They want to do it. Before, they didn't talk about it because they weren't sure where the money was going to come from. And now that the money is there, they want to be positioned. A lot of them want to be positioned to deal with these problems because they don't know whether this will ever happen again. Plus, there's a big push underway with the American Jobs Plan to actually fund for the government, the federal government, to provide funding for water and wastewater infrastructure. And part of this plan is is a concept called Justice 40. And with Justice 40, the 40% of the benefits from this money has to go to those communities that have been left behind. So that will give them a chance to be able to work on not only the wastewater problems, but other environmental justice issues that are happening around the country. So yes, I think talking about it, and the fact that a lot of people from municipalities in particular, but even these county governments have always wanted a solution to these problems, but they never had them before. And as a result, we're seeing people that want to be a part of a lot of national organizations are reaching out. I'm hearing from universities around the country. I'm actually hearing from universities around the world. I've been invited to speak to a group in Germany about toilets and wastewater. Yesterday, I had a conversation with a member of parliament who talks about climate and environmental justice. His name is David Lammy, and we were talking about that. And this is in the UK. So there are problems. I've been interviewed by a paper in Germany who told me they really, on large parts of rural Germany, they've outlawed on-site wastewater treatment. And so there are places around the world that are having these issues, and people are paying attention because they are hoping that we can come up with solutions. But I think the trick, as you said, I think the trick is how we're dealing with COVID vaccines right now. The vaccines are being made available to anybody that wants them over the age of 16. And what is happening, if you don't have the funds, you can't pay for it, you can still get the vaccine. You don't have to have insurance to get the vaccine. It's being made available because it's so important and critical for public health and our economy. The same thing is true for wastewater. It's so important and critical to public health, and is also critical to the economy. And I think that this administration is willing to look at new ways in which to get this infrastructure, this critical infrastructure, to the people that need it, and to also replace the infrastructure that's currently there that is failing, because that needs to happen.
This is not a blue or red state issue, right? They're equally guilty.
Yes, it's not a blue or red state issue. It's not an urban or a rural issue. It's just that in the rural communities, because the media never really covered the rural communities until recently, people didn't know that it exists. And most of the U.S. is rural. Most people live in cities, but most of the U.S. is rural. And if we look at the political divide, we'll find that most rural areas in the U.S. are in fact red. So they're the ones that are suffering the most. But I think the solutions that the Biden administration are trying to put forward can bridge a lot of those divides, because everybody has to go to the bathroom, no matter how they vote.
I'm going to take a couple of questions. I know that you are a woman of faith. There's a question regarding that. Beata wanted to know, apart from faith, what keeps you going? Do you see that light in the tunnel?
Yes, I see the light in the tunnel, and I see, because of all the friends. I mean, the fact that I'm here talking to you this morning, all the people that have come to listen, the people that have wanted to help, the people that donate to our nonprofit so that we can function. I hear from people that have told me they've read the book, they've been inspired, people that have shared their own stories about how they grew up with this problem, or how they live with this problem, but they were too embarrassed to talk about it. So that's what gives me hope and inspiration. All of you, the fact that that you took out your time to join me today to listen, that this inspires me, because when people stop listening, I know that I've lost. But the fact that people keep listening, at the very least, gives me inspiration. And I do see a light at the end of the tunnel. And although, I spent this last year working from home because of COVID, but I have probably done more in the past year than I did my entire life in terms of accomplishments, because people were able to reach out and touch me through the internet. And I was able to get a message out there. And it has been very inspiring to me that despite all the death and the sorrow and the trauma that we are experiencing because of COVID, is that we've been able to make some progress too. So just imagine if it wasn't a pandemic, what could be created. So I feel that there's definitely light at the end of this tunnel, and I pray that I live to see it.
I then had a question. How is it that despite, I don't know if the figure is right, 550,000 deaths, 74 million people are still willing to accept Republican attempts to turn the U.S. into Venezuela or worse? Yeah, I understand. I mean, I grew up in America. I knew that that was always there. Trump didn't create anything that wasn't always there. He just gave it a voice. So that for your people who haven't grown up in the U.S., it's very hard to comprehend that number.
It's hard for me to comprehend it too, because I feel that some of these people exist in an altered reality. They're susceptible to untruths, like about the election and who won the election. I think that's why it's so important that people are educated about American, about the principles of American democracy. And people need to read the Constitution for themselves. It's like people need to read the Bible for themselves. When folks start reading the Bible, they start projecting it onto a screen. They tell you what they want you to know. But in order for you to really understand it, you need to read it for yourself. And the same thing is true with the Constitution. I remember going to the bank, and the branch manager told me that there was no separation between church and state in the Constitution. I didn't argue with him. I went and bought him a Constitution and gave it to him, told him to read it, and then we can discuss it afterwards. But I think that's what is happening, is that people are being they're allowing, instead of studying for themselves, they're allowing people to twist the reality for their own personal gain. And that's part of the problem. And we're hoping that maybe with seeing what equity looks like, because a lot of people feel that equity means that it's taking something from them. They don't realize there's enough for everybody to benefit.
Yeah.
And that's a large part of the problem here in this country.
Actually, someone who actually knows this gentleman, Larry from the UK. Glad that Larry's in touch. We can use your knowledge and get help. What specifically can the audience that are here live and those that are listening from the taped version and those that will access this through distribution of other channels, what can they do to help you specifically? Because it seems, you won the MacArthur Award, so that's nice for 5 years of steady income. You're on you have access to the power brokers in Washington. What can we do to help you? It doesn't seem that we can do very much.
Well, yes, you can. I mean, we're moving to Huntsville, and we're going to put together this collaboration to find the wastewater technology that can work, and that's going to take money to fund. And we're hoping that people would donate. You can donate to our nonprofit. We have it's a tax deduction to donate to the Center for Rural Enterprise and Environmental Justice to help support our efforts. Because at the end of the day, just getting the money from Washington is only part of it. That's to help the people, residents themselves, gain access to technology. But we want to start a technology race where we can find technologies that will work. And I think that if we can find something that will work, it will be in demand around the world. And we're looking for sponsors who would like to join us in that process to find the real long-term solutions.
There's an organization that was funded by Bill Gates and a bunch of other board billionaires called Breakthrough Ventures. And what their focus originally was disruptive technology to address climate risk. They have raised $2 billion, and they fund grants, startups, anything around technological innovation. They have an office in Europe, also you might want to look at that. I know several people there, so I'm happy to connect you because they're looking for the innovative technology startups. Indirectly, you're addressing the climate because what you're dealing with is the effects of climate. You might want to take a look at that Breakthrough Ventures,
Thank
and
you.
they have some, super nerds over there looking at all kinds of technology in cement and in energy and in transportation and logistics. And you also might want to look at the EU has just allocated 80 billion with a B euro to innovation in technology startups in Europe and also several countries around Europe, Israel, Switzerland, Armenia, Georgia, etc. So I'm happy to connect you with one of our partners there to access it's called the European Innovation Council. We did the same with my friend in California who's looking at job creation and technology innovation. So can help you. I'm not so strong on the philanthropy side, but maybe there's some pseudo billionaires listening in over here who can help you. What you have all the work that you're doing. You've written several books and you're doing all of these interviews, and then you're moving house. And then going to work with the Biden administration. Do you get requests from other European or Asian countries regarding this issue of municipal waste, like Philippines, Thailand, Malaysia, or India?
I'm actually working with an engineer that's from India, who won the MacArthur Award as well. And the reason that he reached out to me was because of the problem in India. I've been invited to India. I've also been invited to South Africa because South Africa has a water problem. So there are lots of places around the world that are having problems. In Lagos, Nigeria, they're having problems. They're just, this is more common than we know, and it's going to become more common as the sea level rises. Even here in the U.S., I spoke with someone this week from Alaska, who's telling me that she's actually closer to Siberia than she is to the continent, to the lower 48. And she was telling me that because of the sea level rise, they're losing their homes, their infrastructure is no longer working, because, the warming temperatures, the melting permafrost. So in different parts of the world, people are experiencing different aspects of this, but it all comes to the same thing. The waste is not being treated. So yes, we are looking for partners and collaborators. Some of the people that think like I do out of the box things about how we can treat this problem, how we can come up with technology solutions that are not currently available, and do it in a way in which that anyone can access it. So that's the goal, and I believe that within 5 years that we're going to reach that goal.
Okay. But for the Infrastructure Act, the 2 or 3 trillion infrastructure, which probably is not even enough to start really making a dent. It's got to get through, got to get approved. Money that they can print that. Do you think that municipal waste in rural America is earmarked in there, or is it going to
It is.
It is?
Yes. It is. Actually, a person inside the administration actually called me and said, "Did
Can
you
we
see
listen
it?"
in on the call?
I have a few friends there now, but actually called me and said, "Have you seen it?" And I had seen it, and he said, "Did you see the $111 billion?" And I said, "Yes." And I was told, there's an emphasis. Read the part. There's an emphasis on rural wastewater, and I was very happy with that. So yes, they are definitely focusing on this, and I think just the fact that I was even appointed to be part of this wastewater excuse me, the Environmental Justice Advocacy Council, the WEJAC, for me to get that appointment. You know, that was a coveted appointment by other people, and the fact that the Biden administration knows about the work that I'm doing. I've seen even the executive order that he issued on environmental justice, he mentioned wastewater. So I'm hearing now, instead of people just talking about water, they're also talking about wastewater as well. And I like to think that a lot of that has to do because they listen to the work we were doing. They listen to, a lot of people have read the book. The New York Times covered the book and the problem with the wastewater issue. We've also heard from, New York Magazine. I think there's an English language magazine in Germany called Spotlight. I've heard from, as recently as this week, from a French broadcasting company that wants to come here and do a story.
Oh, wow.
I've heard from the largest Italian broadcasting company that wants to do a story. I just consulted with the UN Deputy High Commissioner on Human Rights, and she contacted me to consult with her because of my work around environmental justice. So we're getting global attention. Certainly, we're getting attention here in the U.S. And I believe that, as David Lammy said yesterday when we had our Instagram live interview, when I interviewed him there, one of the things that he said was that when the U.S. does things, it sends signals to markets around the world. And the fact that we're focusing on wastewater and wastewater infrastructure, I think, is very important. So yes, I keep getting back to, I see the light at the end of the tunnel. I just need partners to help me get there.
Okay, well, you can always count on us. Another dear friend of mine, Joanne Savicki from London, she's suggesting that you speak to Antoninas, wow, this is a tough one, Mavropoulos. Happy to help with an intro. I'll send you the link about that.
Thank
Joe
you.
is also a very good resource to have in the UK. She's also a force of nature. We're coming up toward the end. I'm very conscious of how busy you are, and I don't want to abuse your time. If you send me also links, and I'll distribute the links for people who want to order the book or support your organization, we will send everyone a link to the replay so they can watch it again. And if you need to use that replay to distribute to others, I'll help you on that. But if there's one specific thing that this audience can do to make your day, what's that?
Become a partner.
Okay. Okay. Well, that I think that there's the initiative that you're doing is definitely not sexy, but very, very important. And I really admire the fact that you're continuously rolling that stone up the hill for 20 years, but that you're actually seeing that we're getting close to the top, and that you're actually getting money allocated in that, and that it's kind of impacting many, many, many people, not just poor people in rural America, in Alabama and Georgia and Mississippi. Maybe that's why there's more interest now, because the Hamptons are flooding, and others, and maybe Aspen, Colorado, and maybe Silicon Valley, when their toilets back up and their systems collapse because of climate, maybe there'll even be more money for this. So I'm really very, very grateful for your time, and we'll distribute more further information that you want us to get to this particular group. I'd like to take a group selfie, if that's okay for you.
Yes, and please share it with me.
Absolutely, absolutely. So it's very simple. All you have to, everybody, just wave to the camera and take a photo of yourself, and it'll go around, and each one can just add, and then it'll collate all of those photos together. and then I'll distribute all of those collated photos together. So just, jump in there, grab a photo of yourself. I'll send you the final version with as many photos on there as possible as we send out the final link to the replay. The replays usually takes about an hour or two. I want to thank everyone for coming. We had some comments. There was also a woman, the director of Freddie Mac Housing Community Outreach, who had some issues with audio, but she'll be able to watch the replay, and happy to connect you with any of the people here. So thank you all very, very much. And Catherine, keep your faith. I'm sure that you don't need any encouragement on that. And anything that we can do to help you, please just let us know. Thank you all.
Thank you.
This is a joy, and I really appreciate you taking the time. And give them hell in Washington.
I'm trying.
I'm sure.
Take care.
You stay well, and I'll send you this photo later. Catherine, you stay well.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Okay, is this